I'd like you to imagine that you and I are at work and our boss walks up and says, "Hey, do you know how to configure an ESXi host and vSphere to connect to and create a data store on an iSCSI based network storage device?" As a result of our time together in this nugget and the hands-on practice associated with this nugget, the answer would be absolutely yes. Let's begin. So here's the process that we get to follow to create an iSCSI network-based data store. First of all, we're going to create a new vSwitch. Now, we don't have to. We could create the individual ports on an existing switch. But to keep it nice and clean and to keep this storage network completely separate, I've made the management decision to go ahead and create a logical vSwitch inside of each of the ESXi hosts just for storage. So we'll create new vSwitch 2. We're also going to use a dedicated uplink of VMNIC 2. And I've drawn that right here in orange. So our storage network is orange, the 1011 network. And there's our connection from VMNIC 2 going to that storage network. So to pull this off, because we're using a software-based initiator, where we're using a virtual adapter on the ESXi host, that's also going to involve some VM kernel networking. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new VM kernel adapter with its own IP address on the 10.11 network, and we'll associate that new VM kernel adapter, VMK1, with a VM kernel port on the new vSwitch 2. And regarding the IP addresses, we'll follow the same standard. So ESXi1 will be 10.1.1.101. ESXi2 on the storage network will be 10.1.1.102. And ESXi3 on the storage network will be 10.1.1.103. And our appliance providing the iSCSI target is at .111. So it's going to be 10.1.1.111. And then we're going to create a software-based host bus adapter, an iSCSI host bus adapter, and we're going to associate that iSCSI host bus adapter with VMK1. Because when the ESXi host is communicating with this storage appliance, the iSCSI appliance, both parties have to have an IP address. And it's the IP address that's associated with VMK1 that we're going to use on that storage network as we talk back and forth between the iSCSI appliance and each of the ESXi hosts. And then the last step to make it work is we need to train each of the ESXi hosts where the iSCSI target is. And we're going to do that as a property of the host bus adapter. So I'll walk you through each of those steps. And hey, the great news is this. Check it out. We get to do it 3 times because it's going to be the identical process on ESXi1, ESXi2, and ESXi3. And then the last step, after each of the ESXi hosts has access to this iSCSI resource, we're going to logically create a data store using the resources on the iSCSI target. And once we do, that network-based data store will be available to any of these 3 ESXi hosts. So if we deploy a new VM, for example, instead of using local storage in a local data store, we can use a network-based iSCSI data store. So without further ado, let's go to our management workstation, and we'll launch a browser and connect to the vCenter server appliance, and we'll follow these steps. So here on DCNUG, we'll go ahead and double-click on the shortcut to get to the vSphere web client right here on the desktop. We'll supply our username and password as we have in the past and click Login. And while that's initializing, I'm also going to bring this full screen so we can get the most real estate possible. All right, fantastic. Let's go ahead and start in order. We'll do ESXi1, then 2, then 3. So we'll click on ESXi1, and with it selected, we can click on Configure. And then in this column here, under Networking, we'll go to Virtual Switches. And then from here, we'll go ahead and click on the icon for Add Host Networking. And because we need to add a VM kernel port, a new switch with the new uplink, we can do all 3 of those in one fell swoop by just using the first radio button here, VM kernel network adapter. And with that selected, we'll go ahead and click on Next. Now it's asking us which switch do we want to use. And we can browse for the existing switches, but we want to create a new one. So we'll create vSwitch 2. So I'll click on Cancel there, and we'll click on the second radio button for a new standard switch, and then we'll click on Next. For active adapters, we don't have any associated with this new switch yet, so we can fix that by clicking on the plus symbol. Based on our plan, we're going to use the uplink of VMNIC 2 with this new vSwitch 2. And with that selected, we'll click on OK. We'll verify it shows up here in the active adapters and click on Next. Now for the network label, this is the network label for the VM kernel port that's going to be associated with this switch. So let's call it storage-A. It won't be associated with any specific VLAN, so we'll leave that at 0. And we'll use the default protocol stack. And then down here, if we were using this VM kernel port that's going to be associated with this switch for any of these features, we would go ahead and check the boxes next to the features that we might want to use it with. In our case, we're going to be using this VM kernel port for the benefit of network-based storage in iSCSI. And that's not one of the boxes that we have here to check. So we're going to leave all of these blank and then click on Next. And we want to use a static IPv4 address. So we'll go ahead and click on the radio button for static IPv4 address and then put in the IP address of 10.1.1. That's our storage network, .101 for ESXi1. And then we can hit the tab key to go down one field and put in the mask of 255.255.255.0, which is a 24-bit mask. And currently this is showing in gray. This is showing the existing default gateway and our current DNS server. If we wanted to override the default gateway, we could put a check in that checkbox and do it. But remember, with iSCSI, we do not want to have any routing whatsoever between the IP address of our VM kernel port we're using for iSCSI and the iSCSI target. So because the initiator, us, the ESXi host, and the target are both on the 10.1.1 network, we're not going to have to go through a router because we're on the same logical network, which is ideal. So let's go ahead and click on Next to continue. Here's a summary, and we'll click on Finish. All right, let's go ahead and go on to ESXi2. So here on ESXi2, with the Configuration tab selected and under Networking and with Virtual Switches selected, we'll go ahead and click Add Host Networking here as well. We'll leave the default radio button set at the top for VM kernel network adapter and click Next. Then we'll click on New Standard Switch and click Next. We'll click on Add to add an uplink, and we are going to choose VMNIC2. So with that selected, we'll click on OK, and then Next. And then we're going to go ahead and call this VM kernel port, we're going to name it Storage-A. Leave all the other defaults as they are, click on Next. Select the radio button for a static IP address, and because this is ESXi2, it's going to be 10.1.1.102, and again a 24-bit mask. And we'll click on Next, and then click on Finish, and we've got one more to go, and that's ESXi3. So with ESXi3 selected, and on the Configure tab and Virtual Switches, we'll click on Add Host Networking once again. Using the radio button for a new VM kernel network adapter, we'll click Next. We'll select New Standard Switch, click on Next. We'll add a VMNIC as an active adapter for this new switch, and we're going to choose VMNIC2, just like we did on the other two hosts, and click on OK, and then click on Next. We'll name this Storage-A for the VM kernel port network label, and click on Next. We're going to use a static IP address here as well, and it's going to be 10.1.1.103 with a 24-bit mask. And with that in place, we'll click on Next. Here's our summary, and we'll click on Finish. So now, if we go down to Recent Tasks and click on that, it's going to show us the last 3 recent tasks, which were to update the network configuration on each of the 3 hosts. Looks great. So let's step back a moment and see where we're at. We created the new vSwitch with the uplink of VMNIC2. We also created a new VM kernel port called VMK1. So next, we're going to go to each of the ESXi hosts and create a logical iSCSI host bus adapter on each one of them. And with the host bus adapter created on all 3 of them, and as part of creating that host bus adapter, we're also going to bind it to VMK1, so it can use an IP address on the ESXi host as it communicates to the iSCSI target. And we're also going to point that host bus adapter to the iSCSI target at the IP address of 10.1.1.111. So let's go ahead and continue our configuration, and we'll start with ESXi1, and we'll work our way through. Okie doke, so starting on ESXi1, we'll click on ESXi1, and with the Configure tab selected, under Storage, we're going to go ahead and click on Storage Adapters. This is where we would go to not only see the storage adapters, but also to create a new logical iSCSI host bus adapter. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and click on the little plus symbol here under Storage Adapters to add a new storage adapter. So we'll click the green plus symbol, and then from the drop down, we're going to click on Software iSCSI Adapter. It's saying, hey, after you add this, you need to do some additional configuration, like bind a VM kernel port to it and point to an iSCSI target, which we will do. So we'll click on OK. And after a few moments, that new adapter shows up right here. So it's VMHBA65. And here's the identifier for it. So there's 2 specific things that we need to configure about this adapter. Number 1, we need to specify which VM kernel port it should be bound to. And secondly, we need to identify the iSCSI target of where to go and get the goods. Where is that iSCSI resource? So to do that, with the host bus adapter selected, down here below in the adapter details, we're going to click on Network Port Binding. And this is where we would associate the VM kernel port we want to use with that host bus adapter. Currently, there are no VM kernel ports associated with this adapter. We're going to fix that by clicking on the plus symbol right here. Currently, we have 2 VM kernel ports. So if we click on a VM kernel port, in the bottom, it has details about that port. For example, details about the port group, details about which switch it's connected to, details about the IP address that's associated with this VM kernel adapter, and the physical adapter itself, the VMNIC2. So what we would do is put a check in the checkbox next to the VM kernel network adapter that we want to use. In our case, it's VMK1, and then we'd click on OK. And there it is right there. It also gives us a warning saying, hey, you may want to rescan the adapter after you change the parameters. So we'll take that recommendation in just a moment, but before we do, we want to do one more thing, and that's this. And you go ahead and scroll down this top pane here. With the iSCSI software adapter still selected, we'll go ahead and click on Targets in the adapter details, and this is where we're going to add the IP address or fully qualified domain name if you want to resolve it of the storage processor or the appliance that's supporting the iSCSI resources. So on this Targets tab, we'll click on Add. Then we'll go ahead and put the IP address of the iSCSI server, which is 10.1.1.111, and click on OK. And now that we have a VM kernel port bound to this host bus adapter and we've trained it what the IP address is of the iSCSI target, now would be a great time to do a rescan of the storage adapter. So with the host bus adapter still selected here, this icon allows us to go ahead and rescan that host storage adapter to discover any new resources, which could also be helpful if there was a change in the iSCSI target. For example, maybe they added some additional LUNs, additional resources. A rescan would have the host go out and find out the latest and greatest information. So we'll go ahead and click on this icon right here to rescan the adapter. That does take just a moment. If you click down here under Recent Tasks, see there it is, 0%. It's going to take just a few moments as it scans. And it is done. Fantastic. So I'll click on Recent Tasks again to dismiss that. And now, if we click on Devices, it's identified 2 LUNs off of that iSCSI target, LUN 0 and LUN 1. And if we click on Paths, we have a single path to each of those LUNs as well. If we had multiple adapters from the iSCSI host, we could have more than one path, and that would help with our fault tolerance and redundancy. So this looks perfect. So we're going to do the same process a little bit faster on iSCSI2 and iSCSI3. So we'll click on iSCSI2. We're on the Configure tab, and under Storage, we've selected Storage Adapters, and we're going to click on Plus to add a new storage adapter. From the dropdown, we're going to click on Software iSCSI Adapter. Click on OK to realize we have to do some additional configuration, including binding the VM kernel port and identifying the iSCSI target. So we'll click on the iSCSI adapter, and then click on Network Port Binding. Click on the plus symbol. We'll select the VM kernel port called Storage A, which is associated with the VM kernel adapter VMK1. And with that check in the checkbox, we'll click on OK. Then we'll click on the Targets tab just to the left. We'll click on Add. We'll go ahead and put the IP address of the iSCSI target, which is 10.1.1.111. Click OK. And then let me just bring this window down a little bit so we can see the top part. Then with the host bus adapter still selected, then we'll hit this icon right here to rescan on that adapter. Again, we could go down to Recent Tasks, make sure that completes. Wait for it, there you go. So it's done, fantastic. We'll minimize that back down. And then we can click on Devices and verify that we can see both LUNs. We can also click on the paths and verify we have paths to each of the LUNs. We can also click on Network Port Binding just to verify the VM kernel port, the VM kernel adapter, and the uplink that's involved, that's providing the access from this iSCSI host to the iSCSI target. So that's fantastic. That's 2 down, 1 to go. So we'll click on iSCSI3, and on the Configure tab under Storage with Storage Adapter selected, we'll click on the plus symbol to add a new storage adapter. And from the drop-down, we'll select Software iSCSI Adapter. We'll click on OK. Here it is. So we'll select it. We'll click on Network Port Binding. Click on the plus symbol to bind it to VMK1, which is associated with our VM kernel port called Storage-A, and click on OK. Then to the left of that, we have the Targets tab. So with the target selected, we'll click on Add, and we'll put in the IP address of 10.1.1.111 and click OK. Now that we've done that, with the host bus adapter selected, we'll go ahead and rescan that adapter. And the refresh implies it's done. So if we click on Devices it sees both LUNs, and if we click on paths, we have a single path to each of the LUNs. That looks fantastic. So now that we've done everything else on this list, our last step is to create the data store itself from the resources being provided by that iSCSI target. So to do that, what we're going to do is let's click on the Las Vegas Data Center. And of course, we don't actually have to click on something to go configure it. You can just right click on something, and then from the drop down, you can go ahead and specify settings, and that's going to move you over to that device and to the configure tab so you can configure that device. But I often like to just click on the thing I'm going to configure, and that way I know I'm there and I know everything on this screen is related to that object. In any event, that's just a personal preference. You're welcome to do it any way that works for you. So with the Las Vegas Data Center selected, we'll right click, and from the drop down regarding that Las Vegas Data Center, we'll hover over storage, and then over on the submenu, we'll click on New Data Store. We're going to put it in the Las Vegas Data Center. We'll click on Next. It's asking us about the type of data store. In this example, we're going to use VMFS. The other two options here are NFS and virtual volumes. So we're going to create a VMFS-based data store using the iSCSI target resources. So with VMFS selected, we'll click on Next. Let's go ahead and call this iSCSI-data store. And now the challenge is, how does a data center know what iSCSI resources are available to the ESXi hosts? The answer is you have to ask the hosts, and that's what this drop down here is for. So from this drop down, we can click on any one of them, and it will reveal the actual resources. So ESXi1 sees LUN 0 and 1. If we use the drop down again and go to ESXi2, it also sees the two LUNs. And if we use the drop down again and select ESXi3, it also sees the two LUNs, which is a great idea, by the way, just to verify that each of the ESXi hosts has been already properly set up and can see those LUNs. Because once we create a data store, if there's an ESXi host that doesn't have the properly configured host bus adapter, it won't be able to use the data store. So now that we can see the resources, we'll click on the first one. We'll just highlight or click on LUN 0 that we'll use to create the data store and click on Next. Do we want to use the older VMFS 5 for backward compatibility, or do we want to use VMFS 6? So we're going to use the latest and greatest version of VMFS. We'll click on Next. And now it's saying, hey, I've got 79 gigs available on that target on LUN 0. How much do you want to use? So what we could do is use this slider and specify how much we want, or you can just type it in. And what I'd like to do is, let's go ahead and use 60 gigs. So if you put in 60 and press Enter, it'll automatically move the slider exactly to that point. It's going to use a block size of 1 megabyte, and we'll click on Next. Here's a summary of what it's about to do, and we'll click on Finish. And down here on Recent Tasks, if we click on that, it looks like it's completed the data store creation. But what's curious is we're currently looking at the Las Vegas Data Center. Here's the Summary tab, and it says 3 hosts, 2 virtual machines, 2 networks, and 3 data stores. And those 3 data stores are the local data stores on ESXi 1, 2, and 3. So what we need to do here is just refresh the display. So we'll click on the refresh icon right here. So magically now it reflects 4 data stores. And if we click on this icon right here, which is the storage icon, and we now have an iSCSI data store as well. And now with that iSCSI data store, our ESXi host can use that iSCSI network-based data store to hold the configuration and hard disk files of VMs that are running on any 3 of those ESXi hosts. As a result of this nugget and practicing with the hands-on labs that we provide, if someone asks you, hey, do you know how to configure an ESXi host to connect to and make a data store out of iSCSI network-based storage, the answer, my friend, is going to be absolutely yes. So have some fun with the lab, and I'll see you in the next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.